Yazdi and Dr. Kaya for bringing this celebration and this event to our synagogue and to our community. In 1982 and 2010, respectively, there were papal visits to the United Kingdom. The only papal visits in history to this country. The popes visited London, but they visited the Queen in Scotland. They would not visit her in London. The reason for that is that in London, which is the capital of the United Kingdom, the Queen is recognized as the head of the Anglican Church. The Pope is the head of the Catholic Church, and he would not come to recognize the head of the Anglican Church in her sovereign capital. So she, out of respect for the Pope, met him in Scotland twice. 1982, Pope John Paul II, and in 2010, Pope Benedict. You might wonder, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because memory of history lives predominantly in our minds. And one can ask, the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II, Pope John Paul, Pope Benedict, of course you know the story, right? The issue that caused her to go to Scotland and meet him there rather than here had nothing to do with her personally, nor the popes. It was a different pope and a different king. It was King Henry VIII and Pope Clement VII. King Henry wanted a divorce, and Pope Clement wouldn't give it to him. Being king, he decided, well, I'll start my own church. And that's the reason why Her Majesty is the head of the Anglican Church till this day, till this hour. Now, some people look at that and think, well, how long already is that going to go on for? How long is enough memory? When do we draw the line? Some people would like to draw the line arbitrarily as it suits them. The Jewish people have been around for a very, very long time. To us, memory is everything. This event, this celebration, is important to us as the Jewish people as it is important to the people of Iran. Evyatar Zerubbabel, a sociologist, professor at Rutgers University, wrote a book called Time Maps, in where he recognizes how much of history is in our awareness and consciousness. More important than what happened is how we see it, how we interpret it, what it means to us. The last Shah, Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, and in the 38 years of his reign, revolutionized Iran. The economic growth during the period of his reign was greater than the growth of the United States, England, and France during that time. 432 times the income for the average person was achieved during his leadership. Now, if we are honest, and it's important to be, and I'm a rabbi, so. His dynasty went back one generation, the Pahlavi dynasty. But he was a brilliant leader. And he understood how important history, memory, and identity is to a people. He understood that the land in which he was living and leading the people that he was showing, guiding, was a rich land of great history. And so what he did brilliantly was he showed them a symbolic thread that went back 2,500 years to King Cyrus the Great. And he showed the people this is your legacy. This is your heritage and your history. And that is not just the story. Because as I said, history lives in our awareness and consciousness. When is it enough memory? If you ask the Jewish people, you would say, never. As a matter of fact, one of the most important things that we do in Judaism, in remembering our freedom, is to tell the story of our history. We do that on the night of Passover, on the first night. Do you know where we begin the story? We could begin from creation, but that would take 2 nights, and it's a long time. So we want 1 night. You know where we begin our history? Not at Abraham, which is where you think we should begin it, because our forefather is Abraham. That is where the Jewish people begin. It is the nucleus of our origins. No, we begin it from Terah, his father, because we want to remember the earliest dawnings of our identity, not just where we started. The Shah recognized that as clear as day. And he recognized that you don't draw the line at history arbitrarily. Go back to where the greatness is found, to where the richness of the land started, to its greatest light. And so he went back to 559 BCE, which is when we call him in Hebrew Koresh. That's how he's called in the Megillah, in our holy scriptures. He's there in our holy scriptures because we've been there all the way back. And King Koresh in 539 BCE conquered Babylon. Now the regime of Babylon, I tell you nothing that you don't know, but just for our framework. The regime of Babylon, we focus most on Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was recognized in the book of Daniel, was a king that was powerful, but his power came from subjugating the people, from oppressing the people, from attempting to create and establish his power through the homogenization, through the ripping away of the individuality, the individual spirit of the people over whom he led and ruled. Everyone had to bow at the same time. Everyone had to worship exactly in the same way. Everyone had to do the same thing. Now, the truth of the matter is, in our history, in our tradition, he too went back to an earlier king. Because there's always been a dual rivalry among leaders, hasn't there been? How does rule? How does one lead? How does one maintain power? You either subjugate the people and oppress them to your will, or you recognize the unique and holy diversity that is manifest in their very faces and cultivate it. That's always been a rivalry. So Nebuchadnezzar went to an earlier king like him, Nimrod, who was the king at the time of the building of the Tower of Babel. Do you know how that story opens in our Bible? How does the story open? I'll read it to you, I'll speak it to you in Hebrew, and I'll translate. The opening line is, V'chol ha'aretz safa achat udvarim ahadim. And the entire land spoke one language and only one word, meaning they thought only one thing. Their thinking was homogeneous. Do you think that was natural? Who made that happen? Nimrod. He subjugated the people. He made it so that they should only speak one language, only think one way. That's why he built the tower. It says that he built the tower, he was afraid that people would scatter. And you know what happens when people scatter? They start to think differently. And that's a threat. Nebuchadnezzar did the same. And when King Cyrus conquered Babylon, he said, this is not how a people should be led. This is not how power should be held. Everyone has their own unique expression. And so he reinstated in his benevolence and his understanding of the human condition, which is really the sign of a great leader, that the individual expressions of the human beings over which he was leading and protecting needed to be expressed. Their individuality had to come out. And so he said, do as you do. Pay taxes, but do as you do. And that was carried on by his successors. One of the great Persian kings of our history that we recognize is Xerxes, Ahasuerus. And in the book of Esther, which is prominent, it's very clearly written that his way of achieving his throne, of achieving his power, was to speak in everyone's language. Under Nebuchadnezzar, you had to speak his language. Under Xerxes, under Cyrus, they spoke your language. Am ve'am kimshono, it says. Every nation in their language. Medina umdina kichtava. Every province and their own writing. And it was a brilliant approach. Because what it recognized, and the reason why he had the ability to be able to be strong, we believe, if we are also being honest, it is our tradition that his blood runs through our veins, because he married a great woman that was a Jew, that we call Esther. But we learn from King Cyrus the Great, in his allowance for the individuals over which he reigned to be themselves, and that included the Jews at the time, and therefore the rebuilding of our temple in Jerusalem. What he understood is the greatest power is in recognizing the power of God. And how is that? God created the diversity. And in the great and famous cylinder that lies in the British Museum, that is recognized as the proclamation of Koresh, of Cyrus, he recognizes that there is divine inspiration in what he did. And that because everything was subjugated, it needed to be brought back into its unique individuality. And Cyrus the Great was sent to do it. We believe that. It's written like that in our texts, that he was a messenger of God. And that was why he was sent and what he did. Ben-Gurion, of course, another great leader of the Jewish people, lived just up the road here, probably next door to you, I don't know. Right? Not so close. Yeah? We're filled with history over here. Ben-Gurion recognized what the Shah was doing in his leadership. And Ben-Gurion played right into his lead. And he said, Your Majesty, you are leading like King Cyrus the Great, as is your right, as is your heritage to do. We, the Jewish people, also had great connection and relationship with King Cyrus. He allowed us to build our temple in Jerusalem. May your benevolence be like your predecessor with the Jewish people. And there was, clandestine albeit, but a very amicable and warm relationship between the Shah and the state of Israel. And so this event is very important for us both, our communities respectively. Because what we celebrate here is not really any one man or any one leader, but the ideals for which they stood and how they led. And at the heart of that is that in our hearts and in our souls, in our spirits, is unique individuality. And that is not to say that we do not care about coming together. To the contrary, we care a great deal about coming together. But we do it not with homogeny, but with harmony. And harmony are different notes, different instruments that come together and play something more beautiful than they might play alone. And that is what we strive for. It has always been what it is that we strive for. And so we hope and we pray that the ideals that we highlight here tonight of King Cyrus, of His Majesty the Shah, of the great leaders of the Jewish people, should prevail, should be the light that comes out in the world. And again, as a rabbi, I will allow myself to say that we believe that we had faith that indeed is what will prevail. Because as God created all things, the one hallmark of His creation is diversity, is it not? No two leaves on a tree. No two fingerprints on a finger. As our faces are diverse, so too are our hearts and our minds. God's will prevail. And all attempts at stamping it out will fail. We pray that there is minimal casualty in that situation. And that in events like these, with our friendship, with our camaraderie, with our joining of efforts and forces and strength, we will make the world a better place. That will allow all of the creativity and all of the diversity to be able to find its greatest light. Thank you.
Thank you. Most appreciated.